have a few minutes for some questions. If you have any questions, please come up to the mics in the middle of the aisles, and please identify yourself when you ask a question.
No questions. I completely agree with everything you said.
No?
Is he coming out? I don't know. I should know. I don't know.
Good evening. Am I on?
Yes. Yeah, it's on.
Can you hear me? Okay, good evening. It is most definitely what I consider to be a privilege to be in your midst. The question is directed to David. You spoke concerning about disability and whatnot, and the case that was brought to court, and it was basically granted favor, and it was somewhat repealed thereafter. You did not really mention what exactly was that matter, that the issue of the matter. You did not, if you did, it kind of slipped me. Oh, my name is Richard Mitchell, Reverend Mitchell, and I just basically wanted to get more gist of it, and why the judge or the panel judges, I'm not quite sure if it was brought before when it was appeal, appeal, it was brought before 2 or more judges. So on what criteria did they basically...
Okay, thank you. The case from the mid or early 90s was called Eaton versus Brant County Board of Education. Emily Eaton was a little child who had significant disabilities. She wanted, and her family wanted her to be able to go to school in the mainstream school system, and wanted a choice for that. And the school board, if memory serves, said no. There was an internal appeal, and she lost. And so an argument was taken up through the courts. And the Ontario Court of Appeal, in a decision written by Justice Arbour, later went on to the Supreme Court of Canada, and after that on to other things of comparable impressive significance. The Court of Appeals said, basically drew on the American experience of racialized kids in schools, that's separate but equal, sending kids to segregated educational environments is presumptively discriminatory. And that if the government wants to justify it, at least in a case where the family doesn't want the child segregated, the government has the burden to prove that that is the appropriate place. And the province, which I would think is right, kids with disabilities should be presumed to be able to go to school with kids without disabilities. Segregating kids with disabilities can cause all sorts of problems for the kids with disabilities, and educates kids without disabilities to think that kids with disabilities belong in segregated environments, not part of the mainstream. And Canada has historically been years, perhaps decades, behind the United States. The U.S. guarantees on a law passed in the early 70s has guaranteed the right of all kids with disabilities to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Now, there may be some cases where segregation is needed, or there may be situations where the family prefers segregation, thinking it's more appropriate. But at least the school board shouldn't be forcing a kid with a disability to segregation without justifying it under Charter Section 1. The government appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. There were other procedural points I won't burden you with, but the Supreme Court of Canada reversed and concluded essentially that because she had an individualized hearing on her placement, that was enough. I'm oversimplifying, but in substance, that's it. And there was a dramatic moment in the Supreme Court of Canada during oral argument. I watched it on TV. Yes, blind people watch TV. When counsel for Emily Eaton, now Mr. Justice Stephen Gouge of our Court of Appeal, argued, I'm paraphrasing because I'm doing this from memory, it's been a while, but essentially argued that this is akin to the sort of separate but equal approach that was denounced in the U.S. Supreme Court. And a member of the court, I believe it was Justice Gontier, said, well, kids with disabilities are different than racialized kids because racialized kids are born with their race. Well, Emily Eaton was born with her cerebral palsy or whatever the disability was. So there was a real disconnect, unfortunately, in the outcome and in the case between the principles of equality that we need. Fortunately, the damage was in the education context, but was the progress of the subsequent Eldridge case, the sign language in the hospitals case, really got all the attention and is the important case that's had a long-term impact. The Eldridge one.
If you don't mind, just a follow-up and another brief question. If the question, the thing is, earlier, Mr. Honorable former Chief Justice stated that at times honorable and learned judges do err, and sometimes their error is not addressed appropriately, and as we can see with the case with the disability suit that was brought or whatever it was. I'm just going to stop on that and ask Mr. Grace. I applaud you for bringing up the matter concerning our beloved brother that has passed on, Charles Roach, who has resiliently championed some cases and still champion, even though he's not here, an issue that was dear to his heart. I just wanted to ask you, Grace, are you, being that you are a faculty at York University, are you, is it in your position to somewhat bring forth some of these issues to your students?
The answer is yes. I do have really interesting conversations with my students about these issues. Some of them come in with a fairly developed understanding of these issues. Sometimes they come in with and a developed sense of what the experience of particular groups in the society is with regard to whether it's human rights or economic rights. And so we have animated conversations, and hopefully that unsettles their knowledge base.
I think there's two more questions, so if we're running out of time, so if you can keep them brief, I'll really, really appreciate it because we have to finish at 6.
Yes. Can you hear me? My name is Edgar Godoyan with the Ontario Federation of Labor, and I'd like for Avi and Brother Galabusi to talk about the impact on labor of this migrant migration changes to bring migrant workers. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of them, and now it's even legal, I believe, to pay less, 50% less or something like that. Can you elaborate what is the impact? Because my understanding is precarious work, is insecure jobs.
It's an economic question. It's
So, my analysis of what's been happening over the last 5 years with the new government is that it is a continuation of a process that I previously suggested was the neoliberalization of the economy. The idea is to bring labor into competition and lower the wages of workers. And the more people you bring into the country that do not have the same set of rights as the people who are in the country who are going to compete for the same jobs, the more likely you are to undermine the ability of those workers to bargain effectively and collectively for good working conditions, better wages, and the more likely you are to expand that experience of precarious employment that I was talking about earlier on. And in many ways, that along with discrimination in employment is responsible for the weaknesses that I was talking about with regard to socioeconomic status of racialized groups and immigrants in this in this city and in the country. So a critical piece of that, this, again, 70% of us get our livelihood from the labor market. 70% of us. I often hear people talking about how we need to have self-employment and entrepreneurial, develop entrepreneurial skills and all of that. That's wonderful. The overwhelming majority of us are going to make a living, not by self-employment, but by being employed by other people. So issues of access to the labor market, equitable access to the labor market, we used to talk about employment equity, are really, really critical to dealing with the experience that I'm talking about. And the ability of labor to support the organized labor, to support effective bargaining by employees in workplaces makes all the difference. That's the difference between the post-war period and the last 30 years. The critical difference between the post-war period and the last 30 years in terms of redistribution is that we do not have institutional mechanisms by which we distribute income equitably.
Okay. I'd like to thank the panel for the very interesting discussion and presentations. I have a small gift for each of the panel members, except for Avi.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's chicken. It's over here. Yeah, there's.
Now we have